17 games in a row with a point is pretty good. It's a pretty good thing to do. Longest amongst active players, tying Connor McDavid. Just a absolute heater. And everybody's talking about William Nylander, right? It's just like, this is the topic. How much do you pay him? How good is he? Is he the Leafs' best player right now? Does he own Sweden? Is there anyone that you'd rather trade lives with? It's all about William Nylander. Anyways, Mike Kelly, analytics analyst for NHL Network, has also been talking about William Nylander. What's up, brother? How are we doing?
Hey, good. How are you? I totally agree, and I've had some very fun times in Stockholm myself, hanging out with NHL players, and I can only imagine what it would be like as William Nylander. For an analytics nerd, it was a ton of fun. That guy must be having a ball.
Yeah. Like I said, I think that if you had to put a short list together of people you'd want to be on the planet last week, he would be on it, that's a pretty cool thing to be. That's a pretty cool place to be. Showing up for interviews on Swedish talk shows, being surrounded by a ton of babes, your family, and then, just being in a, tank top, showing off the muscles and scoring walk-off goals. Just what a life for this guy. So you've been outlining why Nylander's having more success this season beyond the eye test and the traditional numbers. And so I'm hoping that you can explain what it is to you that has been the biggest driver of this success.
Sure. I think the important thing to remember here is that this has been a guy who's been a real top-end player for several years now. And any player like that is capable of doing something kind of like this, right? So it's not like in the off season. You always love it when there's just this one thing, and you're like, "Oh, that's what it is," and now he's a superstar.
This isn't Lee Stempniak, who Leafs fans are very familiar with. It's like, it's okay. This is different. We get it. Yeah.
So there is one thing though that I did highlight that has been difference making for him, and the home plate slot area, I talk about it a fair bit. It's a pretty important spot in the ice. It's where 75% of goals get scored every year in the NHL, like within a percentage point all the time. So being able to get pucks there for yourself, for your teammates, pretty critical to generating points. And he's always been good at that, like quite good at that. I think one thing, if there were any people out there that thought he's always some perimeter guy, he hasn't been that in a long time, if he ever really was at all. But what he's done this year is skate pucks into that area at a higher rate than he ever has. And that's something that 5 years ago, we measure this at Sportlogic, something called slot driving plays. How often do you drive the puck into the slot? Most contested area on the ice. He was at 3.1 per game 5 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
It's gone up every year since then. Last year it was just over 4. He's up over 6 this year. So it's taken the biggest jump it ever has. And it puts him into company that not a lot of people hang with. So, and you see examples of that all the time now, right? Like the Detroit game where he skates the puck into the offensive zone on the right side and makes a cross-ice pass for a tap-in.
Mm-hmm.
That's an example of it. We've seen him put his shoulder down like he did against Minnesota in overtime and not just kind of throw a perimeter shot on net or loop back and wait for somebody. Like he's attacking that area at a higher rate than he ever has, and that's helping him kind of go from star to superstar.
Yeah, you know what I think is really interesting about this? You're right about the whole, hey, was he ever a perimeter player? I don't think that he was that in the sense that he was criticized or to the degree in which he was criticized. But this is actually, I think, a place where everybody wins. Like the Nylander fans all along go, yeah, he actually did it more. And the people who were critical of him go, yeah, and he should have done it even more than he did. He would find this type of success because he's one of the biggest freaks in the NHL. And so to me, it's like this is a beautiful scenario where the eye test, the criticisms, the praise, the analytics, they all line up and they combine for, it's harmony amongst all worlds, which is really nice in sports. But you mentioned something there that I'm most curious about, because when I saw these numbers, I went, that looks awesome, especially when it's like the bar graphs and I see year over year going up. That's good, right? If that was my money, I would say, yes, this is amazing. This is exactly what I see, bar graph doubling. But can you put those slot driving plays in context? Like, where does that put him as of right now amongst, say, forwards this year?
He's up near the top. I don't have an updated list on me, but those numbers are top 10 numbers for forwards in the league.
So like on a year, on an average basis, that would be a number that you would see like the top 10 guys in the league performing at.
Oh, easily, yeah. So for him to be there now, it could, because that factors into not only goal scoring, but playmaking assists as well, right?
Yeah.
That kind of, if you're taking a puck in there, you are dangerous for any number of options. You can have a lot of rush chances. You can have a lot of rush passes. This is something where it's like you go in there and you can do either one and generate points both ways. It's one of the hardest things to do in the offensive zone because you know how often defensemen and wingers play the dots, right? You play the dot line and don't let people inside that area. Well, that's where he's getting to at this really high frequency.
So this becomes the next question in this, though, is how sustainable is it? Like, do we often see guys maintain that level? And you mentioned that this isn't some flukish player. We're not looking at Lee Stempniak here. But if you're the Leafs, this kind of all comes together for one big question, which is if he's this guy, you have to pay him essentially like a top 10 player, right? If he's a top 10 forward, then he's going to want top 10 forward money. And if it's not going to be you that gives him that, it's going to be somebody else. And in fact, the team that they play next, Chicago, they've got a ton of cap space next year. And I'm guessing that they would love to slot a top 10 player next to a guy that looks like he's going to end up being a top 10 player. And so, yeah, is there something, because like I've looked at the shooting percentage numbers, right? This is usually one where we say, hey, a guy's going to regress if the shooting percentage is here. I'm curious if the height of the slot driving plays that he's making right now is so high that we go, this is actually going to come down like pretty significantly, or if there's another number to you that indicates, hey, no, some of this is going to regress, but maybe how far, or if doesn't look like it's going to regress at all.
That's an excellent question, and it's the right question. What I would want to do to answer that best would be to look at his first, let's just make it a round number, 20 games over the last 5 years, and see if this is something that has started high and gone low. And I don't know that off the top of my head, but what I would say is this, and I very much believe this. There are certain things that we track, certain things that you can do on the ice that you can't fake. Like anybody in the league can score 3 goals tonight. Like a defenseman, a shutdown guy, like it can happen to anybody. Not anybody can carry the puck into the offensive zone 10 times in a game. There are literally guys that cannot ever do that. There are not players that can have the puck for over a minute on their stick in the offensive zone in a game. They just can't do it. They're not skilled enough. This is one of those things where you need a requisite amount of skill to be able to do it at that volume. So I don't know if he sustains 6.5 where he's at now all year, but it is one of those things where if he continues to play this way, there's no reason he can't do it. It's not something that's just going to regress because there are peaks and valleys of it. You're either talented enough to do it a lot or you're not, and he is.
Yeah, he clearly is. I think what's happening here with a lot of it is just he's always been incredible with his own entries, right? That's been one of his big calling cards. And like from an analytics standpoint, I also love when things like that are broken down as analytics where you're like, hey, zone entries. It's like, you mean the time that he carries the puck into the zone? Okay, yeah, fine. We'll call that like a deep dive
shots
stat.
On goal or
yeah, I know. I know. It's just, but that's a good one too, where you're like, okay, so yeah, he's valuable at carrying it into the dangerous areas. Got it. I think that just a lot of what's happening here is that he's been more aggressive with those entries with himself, and a lot of it has been going into the slot and creating those opportunities for others. And when you talk about things that can't be replicated, a large part of it too is the calmness in which he's able to play in those areas, and I think that's why we're seeing a bunch of the added finishing. Right, is he doesn't panic in that slot. He doesn't panic with the puck on his stick, and you saw it when he put the game away the other day. Okay, so the last one I have for you is just about the team in general, because I'm looking at. I went to Natural Stat Trick yesterday, and I'll do this. I don't do it every day because I think that they're not supposed to work that way. But I hadn't been in a while, and I was looking at the Leafs, and they've put together a bunch of wins lately, right? And I'm like, okay, so how has this changed the team in terms of the way that the underlying numbers are looking? And I guess I shouldn't have been surprised, and there's a lot of parity in the league, and it's still early, so there's not a ton separating a lot of these teams, but I think kind of across the board, a lot of the underlying numbers are pretty mediocre. Like, there's nothing about them that is standing out in some incredible way, right? And I'm curious what you make of that, or if you think that there is an underlying number that is really indicative of this team so far, or something that surprises you.
Yeah, I'll give you a couple things that I think are kind of in the most important order first to second or third or whatever where we go here. But the first thing is, and I know you know this, like I see your stuff here, you're pretty dialed in. The Leafs, for all the offense and all that and the power play, the last few years have been a great defensive team, right? Like they don't give up a lot in terms of chances, dangerous chances. Their goals against have been good. Like they've been top 10 team defense in terms of what they allow over the last few years. This year, they're 23rd in goals against, or 24th in expected goals against. Like they're kind of right where they should be in terms of what they're giving up, which is a lot. And they're 30th in rush chances against. Like they've been getting. This was the start of the season. You remember watching them? They're just getting turnover chances against them, like all sorts of stuff happening. I'll give them credit because in their last 3 games, they've given up 4, 4, and 2 rush chances. That's really good. And they're still 30th. So it tells you how bad the first bunch was. But team defense isn't the same, and it's not good. And it's enough of a sample now where the underlying numbers are matching the results in that area that it should be a concern. Offensively, really not that concerned. Very good in a lot of areas. They're not spending quite as much time with the puck in the offensive zone, but I've never put too much value in that. It's more what you do when you're there that's important to me. So offensively, they're singing, I think, and it's sustainable and it's good. Defensively, like goaltending's been okay. We all know Samsonov was down and he's been okay a little bit here and there. Wall was super up and now he's kind of normalized. But I wonder about the team defensively. Like Justin Bourne wrote a really good article on this, actually talking about the guys that went out and the guys that came in and the defensive impact you lose when you lose Achari and O'Reilly and others, and you bring in Domi and Bertuzzi and others. And the biggest thing for me is the blue line. Like, I think you really miss a guy like Timothy Liljegren when it forces other people to play in spots. You know, Liljegren, can he hang on the second pair? I think he can. Klingberg hasn't shown that he can this year. I think it's too much for Giordano over long stretches. Everyone's just kind of off a spot or two. I think that's where, when you talk about playoffs and, okay, now we're playing good teams in 7 games, all that stuff, like that's where this team is going to get picked apart.
Hey, Mike, really love your work and appreciate you coming on today, man.
Sorry, you cut out there.
I said, I really like your work and I appreciate your time today, man. Yeah, it was almost like you were faking it. Like, you're like, I want the double compliment.
Thank you. I was supposed to jump on a bit earlier.
Yeah, it's all good, man.
Home, so thanks for fitting me in, and
yeah,
happy to do it anytime. And same to you, man. Enjoy all the stuff that you're doing.
Of course. Take care, Mike.